The sharp clink of metal rang through the otherwise hushed courtroom as Marcus Dalton set his dog tags on the polished wooden table. Judge Howard Preston leaned back in his chair, the corner of his mouth curling into a smug grin. Moments earlier, he had ordered a homeless man to remove what he dismissed as a theatrical prop. What the judge didn't realize was that those scarred pieces of steel carried a coded history, one that would begin dismantling his entire career in less than 72 hours, because some symbols aren't worn for show. Some are paid for in blood. If you're watching from anywhere around the globe, tell us where you're joining from in the comments below. And if stories of courage, sacrifice, and second chances resonate with you, consider subscribing. Your support allows us to keep sharing powerful, true stories that honor the heroes too often forgotten. Now, back to Marcus. Marcus Dalton woke that Tuesday morning the same way he had every day for the past 4 years: cold, aching, and alone. The concrete beneath the Veterans Memorial Bridge offered no comfort, but it did provide something essential: concealment. The early November rain had tapered off around 3 in the morning. Yet dampness clung to everything: his bones, his frayed blanket, and the government-issued rucksack holding the last 3 possessions he still cared about. He pushed himself upright slowly, his 52-year-old body protesting every movement. The scar along his left temple pulsed, as it always did when the weather shifted. He dragged a rough hand through his graying beard, feeling the weight of another day settle on his shoulders like incoming fire. Marcus Dalton had endured worse than hunger. In cold pavement, he had survived Mogadishu. He had survived Fallujah. He had survived watching 6 men die in an ambush. He could not stop but surviving himself. That was the hardest fight of all. He reached beneath his shirt and drew out the dog tags hanging from a worn chain. The engravings were faded but readable: Dalton Marcus J's service number, blood type, and beneath it all, the designation that once defined his entire existence: 75th Ranger Regiment. He held the tags briefly, tracing the grooves polished smooth by decades of wear, then tucked them back beneath his collar. He kept them hidden most days not out of shame, but because the world no longer cared who he had been. By 7/8 a.m., Marcus had folded his blanket with the same precision drilled into him over 23 years of service. The olive fabric still bore a faded ranger patch, stitched on by hands that once moved with certainty and purpose. He packed it into his rucksack alongside the other 2 items he carried everywhere: laminated photo of his platoon in Kandahar young, smiling faces, most of them gone now, and a broken military radio that had belonged to his closest friend, Tommy Reeves. Tommy had died in Marcus's arms in 2006, whispering his wife's and daughter's names as blood soaked into the sand. Marcus carried that radio like a lifeline. On the darkest nights, when memories screamed too loudly, he would press it to his mouth and whisper into the static, telling Tommy about his day, apologizing for still being alive, asking forgiveness he knew would never come. He walked 3 blocks to the public restroom, behind the abandoned gas station on Maple Street, the one with the busted lock no one ever bothered to repair. He washed his face, scrubbed the grime from beneath his nails, and tried just for a moment to look presentable, to look human. The flickering fluorescent light cast harsh shadows across his weathered features. He stared at his reflection and barely recognized the man looking back. The steel-gray eyes and square jaw were still there, but everything else felt hollowed out. At 8:15 a.m., Marcus stood outside the New Hope Community Shelter on Jefferson Avenue, waiting for the doors to open. 12 others waited with him, some familiar, some newly broken by the streets. He nodded to a young man shivering in a torn jacket, barely in his mid-20s. Another veteran. You could always tell when the doors opened. Marcus stepped aside and let the younger man go first. "You were here before me," the kid muttered, surprised. Marcus shook his head. "You need it more." Inside, a volunteer named Claire handed him a bundle of clean but worn clothes: button-up shirt 2 sizes too big, and jeans with a patched knee. Claire was one of the few who never looked at him with pity, only quiet kindness. You have court today, don't you? She asked gently. Yeah, Marcus replied. Picked up 2 nights ago. Her face fell. For what? Trespassing. Slept in the covered parking structure by Riverside Mall during the storm. She sighed. You were just trying to stay dry. Marcus didn't respond. The law was the law. And it had never bent for men like him, men who had given everything and been forgotten in return by 9:30. Marcus sat in the back of a Whitmore County transport van with 4 others. No one spoke. The air smelled of sweat, stale smoke, and resignation. The deputy driving never looked back. The courthouse itself was a squat gray structure that seemed designed to crush hope. Inside was worse darkwood paneling, buzzing fluorescent lights, and an air conditioner rattling loudly enough to make thinking difficult. Marcus sat on a hard bench outside courtroom B. Hands folded neatly in his lap, dog tags resting against his chest. Across from him sat a young woman in a blazer too new for the building, clutching a manila folder like armor, his court-appointed attorney. Mr. Dalton. She finally said, I'm Julia Santos. Yes, ma'am, Marcus replied. She blinked at the respect in his voice before continuing. You were arrested for trespassing at the Riverside Mall parking structure. You knew it was private property? Yes. Then why? It was raining, Marcus said simply. I needed shelter. She studied him for a moment. I'll try to get this reduced or dismissed. No need, Marcus said quietly. I did it. Before she could argue, the courtroom door opened. Dalton. Marcus stood instantly, posture straight, shoulders squared, muscle memory from decades of service. Julia hurried after him. The courtroom was small and airless. A few scattered spectators, a bored blogger filming, a silent stenographer, a prosecutor rifling through paperwork, and behind the bench, Judge Howard Preston, silver dash-haired, cold-eyed. Disdain etched into every line of his face. He didn't acknowledge Marcus, just tapped his gavel. Case 4723. People versus Marcus Dalton.
Howdy.
Guilty, Your Honor. Julia stiffened. Judge Preston leaned back, smiling thinly. No address. No job. No next of kin. Homeless. Yes, sir. Another vagrant clogging up my courtroom. Anything you'd like to say before I sentence you? I was staying dry, Marcus said calmly. So you broke the law, as Preston sneered. I'm tired of people like you thinking the rules don't apply. His gaze dropped to the chain at Marcus's collar. What's that? Dog tags, Your Honor, Preston scoffed. Let me guess. You're a veteran. You want special treatment? No, sir. Good, the judge snapped. Because I've heard that lie before, pointed. Those probably bought them at a surplus store. Take them off. This isn't a costume party. Silence swallowed the room. Julia gasped softly. I said, take them off. Preston barked. Marcus didn't move. With respect, Your Honor, I won't. Preston stood, face flushing red. You don't get preferences here. He leaned forward. Remove them now, or I hold you in contempt. 30 days in county lockup. The stenographer froze. The prosecutor looked up. The bailiff shifted uneasily, and Marcus Dalton stood still and moving. Unbroken, his silence louder than any defense. Asterisk, the bailiff knew better. He was a former Marine. He understood exactly what dog tags represented. You didn't ask a man to remove them. Not ever. But Marcus Dalton didn't argue. He didn't protest or raise his voice. He simply lifted his hands, rough and scarred, slid the chain over his head, and let the tags fall free into his palm. Then he stepped forward and placed them, gently on the wooden surface before the bench. The soft metallic tap echoed through the courtroom. A quiet sound that somehow carried enormous weight. Judge Preston smirked. There. That wasn't so difficult. Marcus stepped back. His hands dropped to his sides. When he spoke, his voice was calm-controlled, but edged with something unyielding. Your Honor, before you continue, may I ask you something? Preston arched an eyebrow. You're not here to ask questions. Are you certain, Marcus replied slowly, his gray eyes fixed on the judge, that you want me to remove those? Preston let out a harsh laugh. I already ordered you to. You complied. So yes, I'm sure. Marcus nodded once. Then he spoke again. His words cut through the room with surgical precision. These tags carry my name, Marcus J. Dalton, my service number, my blood type, and the unit code of the 75th Ranger Regiment. He paused. Letting the words settle, they were issued to me at Fort Benning in 1991. They were on my neck in Mogadishu in 93 when I lost 18 brothers. They were with me in Fallujah in 2006 when I held a position alone for 4 hours because if I moved, 14 soldiers would have died. The air shifted. The smug expression drained from Judge Preston's face. Marcus continued, voice steady, unwavering. There's blood in the scratches on those tags that will never wash out. They've been buried in sand, soaked in rain, and pressed into the chests of men who never made it home. But if you believe they're a prop, if you think I bought them for sympathy, then maybe you should hold them in contempt too. No one moved, no one breathed. Bailiff Marcus Lowe stepped forward, his hand shaking slightly. Your Honor, may I? Preston, pale now, waved him off. Lowe picked up the tags, turning them slowly. He read the engravings. His eyes widened. He knew that code. He'd heard the stories. The legends, then he saw the name. His breath caught. Ironside, whispered. Marcus didn't respond. Lowe looked at the judge, his face tight with emotion. Sir, this man isn't lying. That unit is real. And if this is who I think it is, his voice broke. I served in the Marines. You don't fake this. You can't. At the stenographer's station, Martha Yates stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. Tears filled her eyes. My father wore tags like those, she said softly. He died with them on in Vietnam. She looked at Marcus, her composure shattering. Oh my God. Prosecutor Rebecca Hart dropped her pen. It rolled off the table and clattered onto the floor. She didn't notice. She was staring at Marcus, color drained from her face. She had prepared for a minor charge, not this. Julia Santos covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. She had thought this was just another file, another name. Now, she understood she was standing beside a man who had given everything and been humiliated for it in the front row. Freelance reporter Kevin Wu kept filming, his hands trembling. What had begun as routine footage had become something explosive. He couldn't stop now. Judge Preston opened his mouth, then closed it. I'm not asking for special treatment, Marcus said quietly, cutting him off. I broke the law. I was trespassing. You can fine me. Sentence me. Do what you think is right. But don't you ever tell me those tags are fake. What Judge Preston didn't know was that Kevin Wu had already uploaded a 20-second clip. Somewhere. 3 states away, a retired Army colonel was watching. Within an hour, it had 10,000 shares. Within 3 hours, 500,000. By the next day, the entire country knew the name Marcus Ironside Dalton, and they knew Judge Howard Preston too. Preston cleared his throat. Mr. Dalton? I didn't mean... Yes, you did, Marcus replied simply. For the first time in 30 years on the bench, Howard Preston had nothing to say. Rebecca Hart stood. Your Honor, the prosecution moves for immediate dismissal of all charges. Preston stared at her. Dismissal? This man sought shelter during a storm, Hart said firmly. He wasn't harming anyone. Further prosecution would be unjust. Preston swallowed, looking at the tags still resting on the table. Motion granted. Charges dismissed. Marcus stepped forward, lifting the tags gently. He didn't put them on yet. He simply held them, his expression softening for a brief moment. Thank you, Your Honor. He turned and walked out. Bailiff Lowe snapped to attention, saluting as Marcus passed. Marcus met his eyes and gave a single nod. Behind him, Judge Preston slumped into his chair, hands trembling. His career was already over. He just didn't know it yet. The video spread like wildfire. Veterans groups mobilized. Journalists swarmed. Public judgment came swiftly. Marcus knew none of it. He stepped into the gray November air and stood on the courthouse steps, breathing deeply. Then he turned and walked on with nowhere to go, but no longer unseen. 3 days later, everything changed. Marcus woke beneath the bridge to footsteps. He tensed instinctively, then saw Bailiff Lowe approaching with a coffee and a folder. "I'm not here to arrest you," Lowe said gently. "You're all over the news." He explained everything. Judge Preston suspended. Millions of views. Veterans rallying. Lowe handed him the folder. Inside was a lease for a furnished apartment, 6 months prepaid, and a counseling appointment. "Why?" Marcus whispered. "Because you've given enough," Lowe replied. Later that week, Rebecca Hart personally apologized. The VA reinstated Marcus's benefits. Back pay followed. On a cold November morning, Marcus unlocked the door to his own apartment. Fresh paint. Quiet. Possibility. He placed his rucksack down. Set the dog tags in a small wooden box beside. Tommy's radio and the platoon photo. He didn't need to wear them anymore. That night, Marcus returned to the bridge not to sleep, but to help. 3 months later, he spoke at a Memorial Day ceremony. "We don't honor the fallen by forgetting the living," he said. "We honor them by seeing each other." The applause thundered. Marcus barely heard it. He was watching the back row, the ones who understood. Judge Preston resigned weeks later. Marcus never thought about him again. Some battles aren't worth refighting. Some victories are quiet. Marcus Dalton had been invisible for years, but he had never stopped being Ironside. And now, finally, the world knew it.